Greetings YouTube, Alan Lube here. It's been a while. I haven't posted a video in a long time, and to be honest, that's just because I haven't been playing too much Flesh and Blood. Even after like the banned and restricted announcement that hit Bullseye Bracers and stuff, like the meta still felt like kinda ish the same to me at the time. And when Dusk Till Dawn came out, I wasn't particularly excited because it didn't really impact the meta as much as I had hoped. I thought about posting like my usual tier lists and stuff, but to be honest, it was like kind of the same as everyone else's, just Icelander, Lexi Dromai at the top. So I figured what was really the point. So I didn't really make one. But I went to Nationals this past weekend, and I didn't expect to do so well, but I did. I ended up getting 9th. Just one placement away from cracking top 8. I really wanted to, do it with Bravo, the hero I've been playing since I started. And I just wanted to do another deck tech. I've done like, I don't know, 5 or 6 Bravo deck techs at this point, but they always evolve a little bit over time. So I just wanted to show you guys an update. And just to be clear, the clickbait title is definitely clickbait. I don't consider myself the best Bravo in North America or anything. I'm sure there's plenty of great and even better Bravo players out there. But, just for now, it's nice to see that I was the top placing Bravo at Nationals at least. I think Ben is also a great Bravo player. He did extremely well in the calling, just barely losing to Yuki in the finals. But yeah, so let's not drag out the intro too much. Let's get right into the deck tech. And if this video gets, I don't know, 200 likes or something, maybe I'll post more videos about how to play Bravo if you guys are interested in that, because sometimes when I see other people play Bravo, I cringe a little bit. So maybe I'll do a little guide. But yep, let's go right into the equipment. It's the same 5 standard equipment you've always seen: Tech, Iron Rot, Crown of Providence, Crater Face, Anathos. And then for the sideboard equipment, I have AB3 and Tunic. This is for Icelander and Kano. Kano is AB3 plus Tech. Icelander is Tunic plus AB3. I think with Tunic and AB3, Icelander becomes a slightly favored matchup for Bravo. And I think you can also get away with AB2 with Crater Fist, or just to save like 3 life, because that helps a lot too. But I just am really comfortable with AB3. I also think Kano is a little easier with AB3, so I decided to just devote an extra slot there. And then I have the Titan's Fist and Steel Braid Buckler. These 2 equipments are literally only play versus Lexi. You can play it versus Katsu too if you want, but I wouldn't fault anyone for playing Anathos versus Katsu if you want to just, beat them up. But yeah, I really like Steel Braid Buckler into Lexi. There's just a lot of on hits that you want to stop, and having that big fridge really allows you to swing tempo or slow the game down, or just give you an opportunity to pivot. Whereas having less armor with Anathos just feels a little scarier, I would say. But you can still high roll with Anathos and win the game with just good dominated attacks. Going into the reds, I have Crippling, CNC, Chokeslam as usual. I still have 3 Chokeslam, which I realized was a mistake because I went up to 40 blues again. Ever since Starstruck came out, I've like thought about the idea of running less blues, but the more I've played, the more I've realized I just really want 40 blues. Like the deck just feels so much better with 40 blues. So I decided to put the 40th in. And I kind of basically was thinking about a lot of different card options for my deck the night before Nationals, and I settled on this, but I didn't really think out my sideboard guide. I kind of just do it before the match whenever I play against a certain hero. But after playing Nationals and looking back, I realized that I probably should have cut Chokeslam down to 2. There weren't too many matchups where I actually played all 3 because I'm running the 40th blue. So going forward, I might cut Chokeslam down to 2 and put another card in the list that I think is necessary. But yeah, the 40 blues are pretty standard. The 40th blue can literally be anything. It can be Stamp Authority. You can play a random 3-cost 5 attack Guardian attack. It can be Crush Confidence, Crush the Weak, Cartilage Crush even. It doesn't really matter. It could be, yeah, just any blue cost 3 that blocks well. But I decided to run Staunch because I'm not playing any big red D-reacts, such as like Red Unmovable or Red Staunch. So specifically for the Bravo mirror, I wanted to have this because if they come with a Dominated Crippling, this can still block from hand and block 8. And it's still a blue, so I can pitch it towards 2nd or even 3rd cycle if I need to. It's a little awkward when you draw it because it doesn't block amazingly because it's a 2-card 5 block. Whereas, usually with 2 cards, you're blocking 6. And then it also costs 2, which means it doesn't turn on Anathos or Titan's Fist. So I definitely ran into some awkward hands. But I think just having the D-React insurance is what I wanted to do. But depending on the player, you can definitely run just about any other card that costs 3 and blocks and is blue. The only other 2 cards I think are questionable, not questionable, but you can change, is Finals Fighting Spirit and Warmongers. Let's talk about Warmongers first. I thought about cutting this card because I figured that a lot of Lexis would be playing Trench and cutting, and not cutting Tunic, but not playing Tunic into matchups where they thought they would play Warmongers, such as Bravo or Ninja. But from what I found, I just felt like the best players tended to still play Tunic and instead just play around Warmonger's Diplomacy, either by double arsenaling with like a Falcon Wing or Rain Razors or something like that. Basically, any card that could punish the opponent for playing Warmongers. So I figured that still having it in the deck was important, but playing it at the right time was even more important, and that's something that I've had to figure out over the course of the event. And then Finals Fighting Spirit, once again, this can be any blue that costs 3. It can block 3. You can play Imposing. You can play Crush Confidence, like I said, Cartilage Crush, Crush the Weak, whatever you want. But in my opinion, Lexi is the only matchup where I feel like Bravo is unfavored at the moment. Well, we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, so I really wanted to tech more for the Lexi matchup, so I decided to go with the Finals to block 5 and gain 1 potentially. The game plan isn't necessarily to straight up fatigue the Lexi, but you should have the option there. It's usually you start out somewhat aggressive and then sort of pivot into a slower game plan. And then from there, you can see whether you draw gas or you draw more of your defensive cards, and you just kind of have to adapt to the situation. And I felt that Finals Fighting Spirit was pretty good. It's weird because there are some games where it gains me a life, and that life usually didn't matter. Either I was already dead or I was already ahead. But there definitely were games where I just wanted 2 block 3s to like cover a CNC or something. So going forward, I'll probably switch this out for another card, but I'm undecided whether I like Imposing Visage for a good turn 1 play or just a 5 attack for rouse consistency. It's kind of hard to decide which is better. I don't like going first in a lot of matchups, and I think the matchups where I do want to go first, I'm already a little favored. So yeah, I don't love Imposing, but I think it's totally fine to add. Imposing is also good versus like Azuri and Bolton if you care about that. But yeah, going into the sideboard, pretty standard. I put Starstruck in the sideboard because I don't recall if I actually play it into every matchup. Maybe I do. If so, I would put it back into the main board. But I debated whether or not I wanted to play it in Icelander, and I think I ended up playing it into Icelander, especially because I'm on Tunic. You can't swing Hammer for 6 if you're on Tunic without dominating with Bravo, and spending 2 resources to do that can be a little rough. So having Starstruck is nice because you can pitch a yellow and a blue, swing for 6, and you have 2 floating resources to pay for Arcane Barrier. Zealous Belting is a staple. We all know this by now. You play it into any matchup you want to be the aggressor. Kano, Dash, Dromai, Icelander, things like that. Spinal Crush, another staple. Sink Below staple. Sigil has basically become a staple at this point in Bravo. It's just really good. Like, your opponent doesn't know if you have a pummel, if you're heaving a Pulverize, if you have a Sigil, things like that. If you draw it turn 1, then it's great because you just get 3 extra life and can still block, or still, if you're going turn 0, then you can still like Arsenal a card, play Sigil, make a Surge, pass, or something like that. Only 2 pummels. I wanted to run 3 pummels initially for Icelander, but after testing the Icelander matchup a bit, I didn't find it was as difficult as it was in the past, around like January, February, when they still had Amulet of Ice. So I think just the 2 pummels is fine. For the most part, I've been able to get through the Icelanders with Tunic AB3. 1 Pulverize. This, once again, is for the mirror match, but after playing at the event, it's probably also really good if you know you're playing into Fatigue Briar, because if you can get it off, either they block with their full hand, which is great because then they can't make another embodiment, or, you know, you just get value on it if you dominate it, things like that. And then 2 Fate for Scenes. I have a love-hate relationship with this card, but I have found that it's done really well. I don't want 3 personally because I just have too many memories of running 3 Sync and 3 Fate, and whenever I have tempo, I just draw into 2D reacts, and it's just, I hate it. So I think 2 is a nice spot to be in. But I could run 3, you know, if I cut the what's it called? 3rd Choke Slam, or I could even cut Pulverize. But I think Pulverize is probably going to stay in the deck now, especially with Fatigue Briar on the rise. So yeah, that was my list. I would say it's fairly stock standard. The only major differences that some people have are these two blues, Findles, Warmongers. Some people don't run the 40th blue. Some people run a different 40th blue. You maybe run 2 Chokeslam or 3, depending on the list. And then Pummels are 2 or 3. Pulverize is usually a 0 or 1 of. And then Fate's usually a 2 or 3 of. And then AB3 or AB2, and then Tunic. But this is what I landed on, and it did pretty well for me. My CC record was 6-2, and I actually went 5-1 in my draft, which I guess is fine. I really didn't expect to do well in draft because I had never drafted Monarch before, but I just kind of forced Prism, and it worked out. So, yeah, that's how it went. I was also 3-1 going into the first pod, which meant that the pod was a little easier than if I had been 4-0 and playing against like other, top draft players in the first pod of the day. But yeah, that's the list. It did well. There are definitely some things I would change going forward, but I'm still pretty happy overall with how the list played. I was really surprised at how effective it was and how good it felt again. I remember back then when I was running 37 or maybe 38 blues with the Starstrucks, sometimes the hands just were really awkward. But overall, it was pretty good. So this is the first time I'm going to post a deck list with actual matchups. I didn't post every single matchup in the game because I would just be too lazy to do that. But Icelander's pretty standard. You run all the aggressive cards. Dromai, same thing. You run all the aggressive cards, except you have Null Rune Boots, and then Icelander, you have AB3 and Tunic. In the mirror, it's basically just a lot of the good value cards. In a lot of the matchups, I will run 1 pummel, Icelander 2 pummels. I think just having 1 pummel so people respect it is pretty nice. They also don't know if you boarded in 2 pummels if your list has 2 and you're only running 1. And or even sometimes your opponent expects you not to run any pummels, and having 1 at a crucial time can just completely flip the game into your favor. I'll talk more about it later, but pummel basically won me the last round of the day. And then I have like a basic loadout, which you can sort of kind of play into things like, if you're playing against Aggro Briar or Katsu or Phi or Levia or Bolton, like all these like quote unquote normal-ish matchups, I just have like a basic sideboard. Obviously, if you're playing against someone like Dorinthia, you want more D-reacts. So I didn't want to just do a sideboard for every single matchup because, to be honest, I don't even know what I would sideboard. I kind of just do it in the moment based on how I'm feeling. But yeah, so that was the deck. Let's do a little tournament report. Let me pull up my trusty notepad. So let's see. US Nationals Tourney report. So day 1, I going the CC rounds. First round, I played a Bravo Mirror, and I got the win. This one was interesting because I felt that my draws were okay, but the opponent Bravo had tempo for like the longest time. They had maybe like a 10 to 15 life lead on me, but I was still able to pull it through because I think they just dominated too much. Whereas I kind of, laid back with D-reacts until I found windows to present big attacks. And eventually I just outvalued them and closed the game. Round 2, I played Briar. This was actually Roger Bodie on Briar. This is my first time playing against him. And he was on like a regular Brio, like an aggro Briar. So that was my first loss, which was unfortunate. Losing round 2, you don't feel great. But in this matchup, it was actually pretty close. I got him down to 2, and I think there were maybe like 2-ish turns where I could have played a different line or made a different play that I think might have won me the game at the end. Warmongers was huge in this matchup because there was a turn after his Channel Mount Heroic where I just played Warmongers from Arsenal, and he drew into a bunch of non-attacks and could only play 1 attack that turn. But the big mistake I made was playing a Warmongers when he had Channel Mount Heroic out, which was a huge mistake because he already had a Lightning. That turn, he literally only wants to play attacks, so I think swinging for 4 damage there would have been better, and it might have made the difference, but it's possible that he could have pushed it a little bit more damage if he had the opportunity to play non-attacks during his CMH turn also. But overall, I think Briar is still an unfavored matchup for Bravo. I would still just run Anathos into aggro Briar because you kind of need to really disrupt them, and Terra Sunder for 7 is much more effective than Terra Sunder for 5, especially now that Briar has Dyadic Carapace as part of her fridge. And also Anathos just is a way to hedge into if you don't know which Briar you're playing against. Round 3, I played Icelander or Bulllander. This was a very much a Bulllander. They played like Scars, they played Wounded Bulls, they played the E-Strikes, Final Fighting Spirit. They had Sinks and Fates. So they were getting a lot of value out of their cards. In that sense, Icelander is like kind of a better Guardian. But I think the main difference between Icelander back then versus now is that they don't run Ironhide gloves anymore. I don't remember if they did in the past, but the fact that they can't stop a Dominated Crippling unless they exactly have a Sink or a Fate and give up all of their armor, Tunic, Iron Rot Gauntlets, Iron Rot Gloves, and what is it? I always forget. Coronet Peak. They can't stop crippling. And that's why I think Tunic is so important, because with your Tunic resource up, you can dominate a Crippling Crush without being worried about being hit by a Frostbite. And even if they have something like Channel Lake Frigid in Arsenal, like, you do not care about Channel Lake Frigid. Like, if they play it out, that's fine. You just swing your hammer, you AB, and then on their next turn, maybe they Coronet Peak or something, and then you just swing your hammer again and AB, and you wait for them to only have like one Frostbite. It does get a little dicey when they have a Cold Snap. That's the only card that can stop a Dominated Crippling from Arsenal, because you need to pay one to not freeze your Arsenal and one for the Frostbite. So that one's a little rough, but outside of those two cards, they can't really stop your Dominated Crippling easily. So that usually just gets you enough value to get there. So then round 4, I played a Kano, and Kano I think is probably Bravo's worst matchup, but I was still able to get the win there somehow. I high rolled that Kano, honestly, because turn after turn it was just like Rouse, Zealous, Rouse, Crippling, Starstruck. I played all 3 of my sigils, and then 2 Blazing Aethers were already in grave, and he had the last one in his hand. I come in with a Starstruck. He has to go off, because if he just blocks, it's just kind of doomed from there. And then I was at 39 life at that point, and he couldn't banish enough off the top, like tomes and stuff, to push over 39 damage. So I got lucky there. Going into the draft on the first day, I just forced Prism, and I went 3-0. There was only 2 Prisms in my pod. It was an even split, actually, 2-2-2-2. And then, let's see, round 5 was... What did I play against? I do not remember. I want to say it was Levia. No, it was Chain. It was Chain. I just attacked with Heralds and got there. I think that for when I drafted Prism, I always prefer to go second in just about every matchup. So getting that first turn to throw a Herald, if you have a red Herald for 7, is just huge. They can't efficiently block it without using like 3 cards to completely stop it. If they only block with 2 cards, then you get a card in Soul. You get the on-hit effect of whatever Herald it is. So I just attacked with Heralds, and eventually he fatigued. I think Chain is a pretty... I mean, I wouldn't say it's like the easiest matchup for Prism in draft, but I found it pretty comfortable for the most part. They're on a semi-timer once they start shackling, and your attacks can be very difficult for them to deal with. Chain can draft a lot of poppers, things like Lunar Tide Plunderer and stuff like that, and they can choose to shackle less. But I think in general, Prism just has too much gas. Around 6, I played a Levia. I was also on this one, but I was worried because I had no Halo or Dreamweavers. So I only had one equipment, and that was Ironhide Plate. And I was worried that I would never be able to make a Spectral Shield to sort of like semi-fatigue Levia. But I just kept throwing Heralds, and they ran out of poppers, and I got there through more Heralds. Very simple game plan. I see a Herald, it blocks 3, it's in. Round 7, I played Bolton. This one was a really scary matchup. They didn't have Via the Vanguard or a lot of take flights, but they just presented a lot of damage, and I made him go first. He charged. He used Halo to get another Soul Arsenal past, and I just kept throwing Heralds, and it was scary because they had 2 poppers, but I still grinded it out and got there. So I would say that was a pretty lucky draft. I got a good amount of cards. I got 1 popper. I didn't get that much equipment, but the consistency of my deck was there. There was a lot of block 3s. There was a good pitch curve, and that was pretty good. Day 2, draft, Force, Prism, 2-1. So my first round was against another Prism, and this one was my loss. It was rough because I think if you, I think if you look back at both of our Prism decks, I think almost anyone would say that I had the better Prism deck, but I think that my opponent just played better than me. My opponent just played better than I did, which is really unfortunate because I think I could have played better as well and probably gotten there, but you know, you can't brew on that too much. I learned a lot from that game. That was my first time playing the Prism Mirror, so I learned a lot about it. I went second again. I blocked out their Herald turn 1, and then I used Halo to make a Spectral Shield, and then I tried to get tempo there from just swinging Spectral Shield and throwing a Herald every turn. And I also had 2 Poppers in my deck, but I drew both of my Poppers on my turn 1, so it was really awkward. I ended up actually throwing one of the Poppers at their face after swinging my Spectral Shield, but I think that was a mistake. I think I just swing the Spectral Shield Arsenal like a blue Herald and keep both Poppers in hand, because that basically gives me 2 extra turns to swing my Spectral Shield for free. So lesson learned there. I played that pretty poorly. My opponent played well, and I unfortunately lost. So at that point, I'm X in 2. I needed to win out draft to even have a chance at top 8, which I ended up doing. Chain was my next opponent, and it was also a win. They played really slow, lots of Poppers, less shackles, but I got there. The main difference was I had a Blinding Beam at like a really good time when they wanted to pop my Herald, and I was just playing Herald after Herald every turn, and they weren't shackling, they played slow, and I just blocked efficiently, made shields when I could, and I just outvalued their deck. This pod was also, let me write this down, hero split was 2-2-2-2, and then on this one, hero split was 2 Prism, 3 Chain, 2 Levia, I think, and 1 Bolton. I want to say it was either 1 Levia, 2 Bolton, or 2 Levia, 1 Bolton. I'm not sure, but it was one of those. And then round 10 was another. Did I play another Chain, or was it Levia? No. I played Levia in round 9. That's my mistake. Round 9, I played Levia. And this one I was also worried again because Levia has a lot of Poppers. It's hard to get through, but I had the equipment this time to make a shield. But this time, the game went very much differently. I played aggressive early. They started banishing early to match. Then I just full blocked until they died to Blood Debt. It was scary because I was on the last 4 cards of my deck, but I kind of counted it out that they maybe only had 3 more turns to banish a card from their grave with things like Time Skippers with a Ravenous Meat Axe or things like that. And on the last turn, they played that one card that randomly banishes a card from hand, and if it's a 6 power, you banish a card from grave. But they only had a 1 in 3 chance of hitting it, and then when I rolled the die, they missed. So that was how that turned out. And then round 10, I already talked about, I played the Chain and I won. So at this point, I'm X in 2, and then I'm going into my first CC round. And unfortunately, I pair into Craig, my boy Craig, and he was on Dromai. And a lot of the SoCal guys were on Dromai, which I think is a fine choice. But I don't know. I love to see Dromai. I think Dromai can beat Bravo, but it's so much harder for the Dromai to beat Bravo than the Bravo to beat Dromai. So I got the win there. It went basically all the way to the end. He did the, triple Chromai, a Lost in Thought stack at the end. Ghostly was at like 13-ish or so, but I had enough pressure to just deck him out by the end and survived through the Ghostly Touch. So he never actually had an opportunity to swing Ghostly Touch with Passing Mirage because I just threw too much pressure at him, so he was kind of forced to throw it when he wasn't sure if I had a Popper or not. He attacked with a Kyloria first, and I blocked it with a non-Popper and Armor, at which point he threw the Ghostly Touch, and then I popped the Ghostly Touch, and from there it was basically a fatigue match. Or I could just fatigue him very easily. So yeah. Let's see. Round 12 was Lexi. I played Michael Hamilton. This one I lost. I played this one really poorly. I took too much damage to swing threats, and it just bit me in the ass. So in the early game versus Lexi, I want to be aggressive. And what happened was every time I threw an attack, he would just block it and play 3 of a kind. I think in maybe the first 4 or 5 turns of the game, 3 of those turns he played 3 of a kind. And it was just, there was no way for me to get tempo. And then at one point, life is at like, I don't know, 30-ish to 15-ish or so. And I decide to all in for a Starstruck play. At that point, I figured my only out was to try and dominate a Starstruck and sort of chain threats and maybe get there. But that turned out to be a big mistake because I think from that point, he only had 1 or 2 Rain Razors left in deck. So maybe if I played it really slow, I could have actually gotten there by the end. But that was a learning experience. And then round 13, I played another Lexi. This one was on Trench, Perch, and this one was a win. I high rolled this Lexi super hard. I played all 3 cripplings within maybe 5 or 6 turns, and then afterwards he plays Codex of Frailty. I get back crippling and dominate him again. It eventually got to the point where I had maybe like a pretty sizable life lead. He was maybe at around 8, and I was maybe at around like 15 to 20-ish. And from there, I'm just throwing efficient threats, like Choke Slam for 2 cards, maybe like a Thunderquake if I have nothing better. I think I almost made a mistake here because I ended up throwing Terra Sunder on 1 turn instead of my blue Thunderquake. But then I forgot that Terra Sunder only came in for 5. I thought it was coming in for 7. So he only needed to block with Perch and 1 card. So that was a big mistake. When the opponent is at low life, dominating attacks and being disruptive isn't as important anymore as just presenting efficient damage, because you want them to block. You kind of need to switch it up from, in the beginning, you throw disruptive attacks that they need to block, or you dominate it so they can't block it. But then towards the end, if they're low life, if they're in the single digits, you only need to just throw efficient attacks because they need to block to actually just live. So that doesn't even matter anymore. In general, I don't like to dominate an attack when the opponent is in single digits, unless you literally have all the tempo in the world, or it's like basically guaranteed that they will die from that dominated attack. If I'm saving 1 card to dominate and they're not dead, I would have rather blocked with that card if possible. So that's just that. And then round 14, I played another Lexi. This was Michael Fang on Tunic Perch, same as Hamilton. I don't know if they're on the same list. I know, I'm sure they talk and stuff, but I don't know if they're on the exact same list. They also boarded differently. I think Hamilton played like 66, and then Michael Fang boarded 68 cards. He also won die roll and got to go second, but could only load a blue drill shot, which was unfortunate that his opening hand wasn't great. So this one, I would say, worked out really well in my favor. Michael Fang drew into some all red hands. I drew into some really good hands. And I also was able to CNC pummel him. I only ran 1 pummel, boarding up to 63 versus Lexi. And I kind of expected him to full block 12, or basically full block his whole hand. But he didn't. He blocked 6, and then I hit the pummel. And then I hit 2 cards in arsenal and another card in hand. And from there, it was basically just a matter of time before I closed out the game. Just throwing efficient threats, as I mentioned previously. I think for the Lexi matchup, what I've learned is that Starstruck is a really great card. But when they're on Perch Grapplers and Tunic or even Trench, they can block Starstruck if they give all their armor except for New Horizon. But Crippling is arguably the most important card in the deck still, because Icelander, like I said before, can't really block it well. Dromai can block it well because she has like a ton of D-Reacts, Oasis, and stuff. But Lexi cannot block Crippling Crush if you dominate it. So if you find the tempo to do so, Crippling Crush is your best friend. And then Starstruck is a card I really like to throw out when I have a Surge, because they can't just 2-card block it, because it's still hitting for 4, which means unless they have all 5 base power arrows, their turn is really messed up. So they could block like 6 and then come back with 1 arrow arsenal. But when you're playing that back and forth game, that's what you want as the Bravo player, is like Lexi on like a 3-card hand or a 2-card hand, and you're on like a 3-card hand or a 2-card hand. That's kind of where the matchup thrives for you. If Lexi's on a 4 or 5-card hand, you're not having a good time. So I think throwing Starstruck with a Surge is really nice, because dominating it early is overrated, because if they have like a really great turn and they could just give you armor and they deal 25 damage back, then it didn't really accomplish anything. Spinal Crush, I tend to not dominate much anymore, also because Lexi can block it for free basically now, because they have Perch, Hornet Sting, and a card from hand. So usually I'll play Spinal Crush or CNC as a way to generate my Surge. 2 blues and a Spinal make a Surge, or 1 blue and a CNC make a Surge, and then that will be how I throw Starstruck or Choke Slam, or sometimes Crippling. If I feel like they have an important on hit that I want to block, then I'll block with the card that I would have used to dominate Crippling and just throw it for 2 cards. Usually they'll block 9 anyways, because blocking a non-dominated attack with armor is usually a mistake. Versus Bravo, you generally also want to play slower if they're not dominating. So usually they'll give 3 cards. Their turn is like really weak. They either double arsenal or they throw maybe 1 arrow. Or if they just have 3 of a kind every time you throw Crippling, then you just cry a little bit. But that's the way it goes. So that was my tournament report. I ended up with 11-3 at the end, and I ended up bubbling at 9th Sadge. Had a few of the other players who were X3 lost, and then obviously I would have bubbled in at 8th, but I don't think that's necessarily fair to say, because there were other players who were X and 3 with better breakers than me that also lost, that didn't make it into top 8 because they went X and 4. So it's just the way it goes. 9th is really close. I'm still happy with how I did at the tournament, but 9th does sting. It stings a good amount. I was right on the edge, but can't be too mad about that. All right, last thing I wanted to talk about before I close off this video is just a little matchup tier list of what I think. So this is the boy Bravo, and I'm just gonna go through every hero and say what I think the matchup is like. So Dory, I honestly don't know. Probably a 50-50. I think Katsu is about a 50-50. They have sinks, they have flick flacks, so it can be a little rough. You can try to fatigue them, but if they line up the Mugenshi into Lord of Wind, you're basically doomed. Reinar, I think, is pretty close. The Intimidate can be really annoying. Levia's is pretty favored. She doesn't really do too much. Let me put another. Oh, I messed up. Move that down. Let me add another. Okay, clicking the wrong button. Let me add a row above. Let's call this like the 65-35 tier. Let's make it light orange also. Levia's probably there. Azalea also probably the 65-35. Bolton probably there also. Briar is unfavored. Oh yeah, let's talk about Fatigue Briar a bit. I actually don't know how my deck would fare against Fatigue Briar, because I'm not running cards like Red Staunch or Unmovable, both of which are really good at covering up their 3-for-7 or 3-for-8 attacks to stop them from making an embodiment. But it does run Pulverize, so unfortunately, I didn't get to play against any Fatigue Briars. I was worried about it because I didn't have any experience in the matchup, but I have like a theoretical idea of how I wanted to play the matchup. I probably still would board 60 cards, and I would probably just try to set up a really powerful second cycle and then save armor for when I want to chain my threats. Like, if they make an embodiment and you throw a crippling, that's like a 2-card block. Like, that is terrible for Bravo. So I was planning to just pitch into my second cycle, make sure my threats are nice and spread apart, and not drawing 3 reds in one hand, and then from there use armor to stop them from making an embodiment and just chain out threats and hopefully deck them out. Anathos is technically the better weapon than Reaping Blade, because every time, here's the thing. When you swing Anathos for 6, the Briar can Crown of Seeds and block. If they have an embodiment, block with 1 card. That's a 4. That's blocking 4 with the Crown of Seeds. That's blocking 5. They leak 1, but they only lose 1 card in deck. Conversely, when the Briar comes back at you with the 2-card 7, like Evergreen or Runic Reclamation or things like that, if you block with 2 cards, you're leaking 1, but you're losing 2 cards while the Briar is only losing 1 card. So it's kind of awkward there. I think for the most part, the game plan is to just grind them out, play defensive until you know you have a chain of threats coming up in the second cycle, because you know the game's going to go long already. You might as well pitch stack it to like as close to perfection as you can. There's no use trying to like get through in the first cycle when they have like a giant fridge and efficient attacks. So ideally the point is to get to the end game where Anathos beats out Reaping Blade, because Reaping Blade is a 1 blue for 4, which is the same as Anathos, but you could block with 1 card and then pitch 1 card, and you leak no damage while only losing 1 card. And then if you swing Anathos for 6, they leak a damage if they go with Crown of Seeds, or they need to block with 2 cards to cover it up. So I don't know. The matchup's weird. I've never played it. There's a chance that Briar just literally runs 70 cards, triple Remembrance, and you literally don't have enough threats to deck him, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, Briar's unfavored. I don't know about the fatigue matchup, but it is what it is. Katsu's probably, or no, Fi is probably right in the middle. Fi is not really popular here in the US. It's more popular in Europe. But the Kodachi Fi is a thing, but I think in general it's like kind of similar. If they're on like Sync and Reinforce, it can be a little scary, but you just try to beat them up and see what happens. Dash, I think, is actually a favored matchup unless they're specifically on Tree Frog Dash. I think like Hybrid Dash or Mid-Range Dash, whatever you want to call it, if they only have like 6 defense reactions, isn't winning against Bravo. The Bravo deck that cuts all the sigils and D-reacts and stuff and just runs all the gas does present a lot of damage, and Dominate just helps you get through. Lexi, I think, is another unfavored matchup, probably around 40-60. Maybe it's even around 35-65. But you know, it probably depends who you ask. I bet if you ask some Lexi players, they might think they're unfavored into Bravo, but I don't know. Kano is literally a 20-80 match. I just high rolled him, so I got lucky there. Viserai is probably a slightly favored matchup. You have Warmongers to stop them from basically doing anything. But they just present a lot of damage, so that can always get you. Oldham's gone. Dromai is a 90-10 matchup. I don't really care what anyone says. Feel free to prove me wrong. I don't know. I think Dromai, like, all the onus is on Dromai to win the matchup, and you just kind of need to stick to your game plan. You know, just kill their mirror guys, their passings, their chromais, and then if they're it. And honest, for my deck, it doesn't matter what kind of Dromai they're playing. I will sideboard the exact same way into every single one of them, and the game plan still works out fine. You just throw your attacks, you throw them efficiently. Don't bother dominating unless it's for game or you have all the tempo in the world. And yeah, usually they can't deal with the pressure of threatening on hits, damage, and pitch stacking a perfect second cycle to get the chromai, lost in thought things. Or sometimes they'll play like triple Remembrance and they'll just throw out their mirror guys and chromais willy-nilly to try and slow you down. In that case, the matchup just kind of slows down, but you still play it slow and stuff like that. You just need to make sure you're pitch stacking correctly. Like, don't pitch stack a hand with 3 non-poppers or even 2 non-poppers, things like that. Sometimes you'll draw hands where you're forced to do that, but try your best to dump cards and block with your non-poppers, if possible, to just get them out of your deck, because you don't want to see them second cycle. If you're running Remembrance and you can like shuffle things and do all that jazz, sure, but I don't run Remembrance. So Icelander, I think, is a 55 matchup now. Dominating, crippling with Tunic is very impactful, and unless they have a very timely D-react, it usually works out. So quick little water break. Arachne, I have no clue. It's probably a good matchup. Riptide, probably a good matchup. Azuri is a, I don't know if I would call Azuri a 6, maybe I would call it a 65-35. Unless you're playing against like a very contract triple Remembrance Tau Azuri list type deck. I think Azuri's favored for Bravo because usually they're maybe only on 1 or 2 Remembrance. They don't have that many blues. They're mainly eventually they just run out of threats and you can fatigue them, especially now that you're running Fates. I used to not run Fates back then and I still felt Azuri was a fine matchup, maybe not super favored, but now that I have like 2 Fate Foreseens, the matchup just feels like so much easier. They really struggle to get damage through, and your Anathos just basically gets them out of the game. Prism matchup sucks. They get auras out. You can't deal with them. You can try to race them, but they get so much value from their auras that it's hard. I actually think with enough practice, it's probably more like a 40-60 matchup because they don't have Gorgon on their heralds. So you can actually just block their heralds normally and not pop them. You mainly have to get rid of like Genesis and Merciful, and you kind of just ignore all the other ones and just go face. They're at 32 life now, so it's not too bad. But yeah, I probably would call it a 40-60 matchup in theory, but I think in practice, until most Bravos get reps into Prism, Iris Prism specifically, then you're probably just gonna get wrecked. And then Vincent is probably another, I don't know, 65 matchup. I don't know if it's a 90-10. I'm sure Vincents can figure out ways to go over the top and stuff, but for the most part, all the Bravos have been fatiguing them. All right, so this is my little matchup tier list. Let me zoom out a bit so you can see it all. And I feel like Bravo is like pretty okay positioned in the metagame. If we look at the top 4 heroes, you have a buy-in, or you should have a buy-in Dromai. Icelander is fine. You don't need to worry about Icelander as long as you have the, Tunic AB3 or Tunic AB2, whatever, suits your fancy. And then the unfortunate part is Briar and Lexi are both slightly unfavored matchups for you. So you kind of have to high roll a little bit there or just outskill them there. But in terms of like the top decks, Bravo is like perfectly fine facing them. So I would say this is a pretty good meta for Bravo. Hence why I did so well. And it was a mixed event, so there's some draft helped me out there too. But yeah, so that was my list. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'll link this list down in the description. Yeah, and thanks for watching. Maybe I'll post more. Now that I've made it another video, maybe get back into the groove of it. But to be honest, unless I really feel like I have something of value to say, I don't really make a video on it, which has basically been the case for the last few months. But yeah, Bright Lights is coming out. That's exciting. I think Mech is a cool class. I think Dash is an amazingly consistent and strong hero. Maybe not like one of the best, but she's been strong for so long. The fact that they're getting their own set, I don't know. We might be entering the mech meta, but we'll see. Let's see. Anything else I want to bring up? Oh yeah, shout outs to all my friends, who supported me and helped me get here. All the SoCal friends, all the NorCal friends, Team Honda Pilot, Team Stroop Waffle, all the friends made, Vegas friends, etc. Just anyone that I know. Yeah, you guys helped me get to this 9th place finish. So just barely under, but yeah. And one more thing. I also did get the content creator kit. But I've just kind of been giving them out to people who are like community pillars, like, my local Anthony Pham. He carpools for a lot of people, myself included. So I gave him some. When I was at Nationals, if anyone ever approached me, I would give them a few copies of the Good Deeds promo. I didn't really want to make an announcement that I was giving them away because I didn't want just a ton of people swarming me like, hey, I hear you're giving away a promo. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Here you go. So I still have a few. I'll probably figure out some way to get rid of them for the community. But yeah, that was all from me. I'll see you next time, I guess, if I post another video. Bye-bye.